I knew that if I took my son back to the United States, they were going to take him from me. I knew that they were waiting to take my son from me, that's what they would do. And I also knew that we were not safe there. So is he out of his mind? And I had already done some research on political asylum before I ever even went to Canada. And anyone monitoring my computer knew that if I was doing research about political asylum, and Canada's right next door, of course they knew 2 years earlier when I was looking things up that I might go over there. And then they knew when I was looking things up again that that's what I would be asking for. And you cannot kick a mother and child out of a country over political asylum. You have, if the United States wanted me and my son to be back in the U.S., since I had no warrant and since there was no protective order and no CPS case filed for me and my son at all, and no investigation that I was quote-unquote fleeing, as they lied about, since they didn't have any reason to have me and my son return to the U.S., they would have, if they wanted that, they'd have to ask for an extradition. And how could they ask for an extradition when they wouldn't be extraditing me for any kind of a warrant, criminal warrant, any kind of a parental kidnapping, and not for fleeing a CPS investigation either. I had not fled anything. And I actually had called Olympia, Washington headquarters, CPS, before I ever left with my son, and I just asked, can you leave the state? If you constantly have people making reports about you, but there is no case, there's no investigation, and it's just a number of complaints. And they said, yeah, they said if somebody calls, they said people call all the time. And I said, well, even if there's a lot of calls, and they said, I was told from Olympia that, yes, if someone could even have several calls made against them by people, and it doesn't mean anything. I mean, it doesn't mean that there is an investigation or a protective order. She said, it's only if there's a protective order that you cannot leave the state or a country. And anyway, I had explained to the people in Canada that they asked me about the father, and I told them there was no paternal interest, and I told them I had papers for that too to prove it, from social services. So they knew. I gave them all that information. And nobody once ever suggested that I was doing something like a parental kidnapping. They knew I wasn't. They were just trying to force me and my son back over to the United States. So then I was driving on this road towards the United States, and I just panicked. I was sobbing. I was just sobbing and trying not to cry because my son was right there. But then I saw a library off to the side of the road in Canada, and I pulled over. And I went to the library, and I asked him if I could use the computer quickly. He said yes, and the first thing I did is look up political asylum. And that was another proof that I had, that my whole intention, those librarians knew what I was looking up. And their country knew what I was looking up. That was another proof that I was asking, and my entire purpose and reason for being there was to get political asylum. Not to, quote-unquote, immigrate illegally. So then, after I looked that up, I was still kind of going in the direction of the U.S., but then I stopped and pulled the car over and got a couple things out of the car. I was getting my son's bottle, and I was just crying. And I was then thinking about what I needed to do, because I was going to try to find some other way to not go across that border, but I didn't know what to do. So I was sort of praying and distraught and trying to figure out what to do. I just looked up this information about political asylum, and I stopped my car, And maybe Canada sent this other person up next to my car just because they're worried, uh-oh, what if she turns around, comes back to us and says, I want a political asylum hearing? I mean, all that Canada did was try to screw me and my son over. And look what they've done to my son. They've ruined my son's life. Canada has ruined Oliver Robert Guy Garrett's life. For who? They're guilty. And they're just as guilty as the criminals in the United States. So then this SUV, which I later realized was probably a cop, another RCMP SUV, one of the Canadian Border Patrol cars. This guy pulls up behind me and he gets out of his car, walks over to the side and asks if I'm okay. And I burst into tears and I said no, and I started sobbing and telling him that I was trying to get political asylum and they told me that I had to leave and I didn't know what to do. And he said, well, you're too upset right now to do anything. So you were not even safe to drive because you're so upset. I mean, I guess he meant because I was crying. And he said, why don't you just go to a hotel at which I can pay for and you can do this in the morning? And I said, well, he said, we'll go to jail if I don't go over there today. And he said, it's not going to make that much of a difference one night. And it's going, you're not. It's going to be fine. So basically, that was the start of how another Canadian law enforcement person was going to set me and my son up to make it look even more convincing that we'd done something wrong in Canada. And I thought that maybe he was trying to help. So he got me and my son a room and at a hotel. Obviously he didn't stay there, he left. And then the next morning he said that he asked if I could maybe meet his wife and did I want to meet his wife and kids. And so I thought that maybe they're going to try to help us a little bit. Maybe I could have a place to stay until I then got over to Toronto and asked for political asylum. Because obviously they weren't honoring my request in Penticton, so maybe I had to go to a different part of Canada. And so I agreed to meet his wife. And actually his kids weren't there yet, but I agreed to meet his wife. Her name was Corinne. And after talking to me, they said, well, you can stay at our house, you and your son can stay at our house for a short time while you figure out what you're going to do. And we could have you talk to an immigration lawyer that we know. So they basically were telling me that I could speak with an immigration attorney. It made it sound really great. And when really I look at it and I think all they want to do is make it sound like it was an illegal immigration thing and not political asylum. So, they forced me out of political asylum illegally. Then they wanted to twist it around into something else, saying this other thing was my only option. And that was the legal thing to do. And all of them were working for the government. And I will talk about what happened after I followed them to their house in my car later tonight or tomorrow.